I wasn't actually planning to talk about this today, but something happened recently at a service with communion that really stayed with me. I think the reason it affected me so much is because I went to church that day, simply wanting to feel close to Jesus. Sometimes life gets difficult, and you don't need an answer. You just want to come into God's presence. You want to feel close to Him. And for many Christians, communion can be a really meaningful part of that. But when the time came for communion, I wasn't able to receive it because I haven't been confirmed. And I think it's important to explain a little bit of that. I gave my life to Jesus when I was 7 years old, after a very special experience that I still remember. I was baptized as a teenager, and throughout my life, I've had a very close relationship with God and with the Holy Spirit. My faith has never been something that was just a Sunday thing for me. God's presence and the work of His Holy Spirit have been woven through every part of my life, and that relationship with Him has shaped who I am. And I also understand the seriousness of communion. I understand the importance of approaching the Lord's table with a repentant heart, and that communion isn't something we should treat casually. So, I'm not saying I should have been allowed to receive communion regardless. I understand why I was invited to come forward for a blessing instead. But what I wasn't expecting was how I would feel. Because knowing why something happens doesn't necessarily mean we won't feel the weight of it. You can understand something with your head and still experience it very differently with your heart. And in that moment, I felt a little bit like I was on the outside. I had come wanting to participate. I had come wanting to feel close to Jesus. And suddenly, I was very aware that there was something I couldn't yet be part of. And I think moments like that can touch something much deeper. That feeling of, do I belong here? Am I enough? Am I really part of this? And perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe you've had a moment within church that touched something much deeper than you expected. Maybe you've felt that sense of being on the outside, looking in. And I think we need to be able to talk about those experiences honestly. Because acknowledging that something affected us doesn't mean we're attacking the church. And it doesn't mean we don't have faith. Because something can make complete sense and still be painful. Both things can be true. I understood the reasoning, and I was still disappointed. And I think that's okay to admit. Because sometimes, as Christians, we feel like we have to immediately turn every difficult experience into a lesson. Well, God has a reason. Everything happens for a purpose. I just need to trust Him. And there is truth in trusting God. But trusting Him doesn't mean we can't also say, that hurt. I don't understand. I wish it had been different. I think God can handle our honesty. Sometimes prayer is simply bringing God exactly where we are. And afterwards, my husband noticed the light coming through the window. It was such a simple moment, but it stayed with me. Because I had gone into church wanting to feel close to Jesus. And I had to remind myself that Jesus wasn't suddenly distant because I couldn't receive communion. He was still there, in the quiet afterwards, in the light coming through the window, in the fact that I was still seeking him. And I think that's what I'm learning. Sometimes we become so focused on the particular way we expect God to meet us that we miss the ways he's already present. The disappointment was real, but it wasn't the whole story. Because ultimately, I don't want this to simply be a story about communion. It's a story about what happens when something doesn't go the way we hoped, and we have to find our way back to the heart of what brought us there in the first place. For me, that was Jesus. Not getting everything right, not proving that I belonged, not performing Christianity correctly, just Jesus. And maybe that's something you need to hear too. If you've ever gone into church feeling like you don't quite belong, if you've ever felt like you were on the outside looking in, or if you've ever reached out for God and somehow walked away feeling disappointed, you're not a bad Christian for feeling that. Your questions don't make you faithless. Your disappointment doesn't mean you failed God. You can bring those feelings to him. You can say, God, I don't understand this. I wish this had been different. I feel like I don't belong. And you can still keep seeking him. Because your relationship with God isn't dependent on having everything figured out. Sometimes, when we're looking for God in one particular moment or one particular way, we discover that he was beside us all along. Maybe that's what I needed to remember that day. I came to church wanting Jesus, and even though the moment wasn't what I expected, Jesus was still there. And that's what I want to take away from it. Difficult experiences within church do matter. Our feelings matter. Our questions matter. But they don't have to be the end of the story. We can acknowledge what hurt. We can ask questions. We can learn. We can grow. And we can keep coming back to Jesus. Even when we don't understand. Even when we feel like we're still finding our place. Even when our faith is still a work in progress. And I think that's a big part of why I created Held Home. Because I don't have everything figured out either. Held Home is a space for honest conversations about faith and life, especially those seasons where things feel complicated, disappointing, uncertain, or overwhelming. It's about finding God in the middle of ordinary life, in the difficult moments, in the waiting, in the questions, and Sometimes, in the really small moments we might otherwise overlook, like light coming through a church window. I'm not here because I have all the answers. I'm here because I'm still learning too. Still seeking Jesus, still figuring things out. And if you're doing that too, I hope you know that you're welcome here. You don't have to have everything figured out before you come to Jesus. You can come exactly as you are. So, if you're in a difficult season, if your faith feels messy, or if you're carrying questions you don't know what to do with, I hope Held Home can be a place where you feel held. A place where we can be honest about faith and life without pretending everything is always easy. And remind ourselves that even when we don't understand what God is doing, we are still held. And we are still home. And perhaps that's what I needed to remember that day too. I came to church wanting Jesus, and even when the moment wasn't what I expected, he was still there. And he still is. Thank you for staying with me for this video. I'll see you on the next one.